So my name is Claire McGilly, and I'm here with Congressman Jim Renace's office conducting Veterans History Project interviews at the Congressman's Wadsworth District office. Today is April 18th, 2018, and I'm here today with Woodrow Wilson and his wife, Bobby. So, Woodrow, could you tell us a little bit about where you were born, when and where you were born, and maybe a bit about your family and parents?
Sure, but would you call me Woody, please?
Yes.
I was born in Canton, Ohio, first half of last century, October of 1946. In my family, there was my mother, my father, who was a World War II veteran. In fact, as an enlisted man, he fought on Attu and the Aleutian Islands. Then he came back to the States, went to officer training, and as an officer, he fought in Germany. So, and I have a younger sister. She's 2 years younger than me.
Okay. What does she do, or did she have any history with the service?
Just like people of my age, she's retired. But she was a homemaker, and she worked a little bit outside the home, I think, at Chrysler or something in their cafeteria somehow.
Awesome. And before you entered the service, what were you doing? It's a little bit of back history.
Well, my father was an iron worker. I don't know if you know what they are, the people that run around in the steel buildings and put them together. So I got to start doing that at the age of 16, and I did it in summers prior to my graduating from high school. And then after I graduated from high school, I got a union book, they called it, and I was a union iron worker. And I went to Bowling Green University right out of high school. My parents said I was going to go to college. I just did eeny, meeny, miny, moe and picked Bowling Green. I had no clue. I went there for a couple years, essentially wasting my parents' money. And I got discouraged because one thing I did not do was do homework or study in high school. And you don't have to be smart to graduate from college. You just have to be able to make yourself study, which of course I didn't. So I got tired of wasting my parents' money. I went down, I'd heard about this program through the Navy where you could join the Navy Seabees, which are their construction battalion. And if you had prior experience, they would, you'd start off at not the lowest level. So I went, which is E1. So I went to the recruiter in Canton and talked to them, and they said, oh, if you join, we can make you an E4, which is a petty officer, which is a non-commissioned officer. So I joined up, they called it the Directly Procured Petty Officer Program. Went to Gulfport, Mississippi, did our training, which was a combined basic training and non-commissioned officer academy. After that, I got assigned to a NMCB-11, Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 11 in Port Hueneme, California. But when I got there, they had already left for Vietnam. But at that time, you had to have 3 or 4 months service in the States before you could be sent to a war zone, so I had to wait until I think April or something, and then I finally went over.
So what was your training like in Gulfport?
Well, we did the normal basic training stuff, you know. Gulfport, Mississippi, right, on the,
Yes.
what did they call that? The something coast of the, it was the Riviera of the Gulf Coast or something like that. So we were down there and yes, and we had to do drowning training. They had to show that you could swim. So we're down there in an outdoor pool in bathing suits, and it was snowing. Yes, I know.
No way.
Way in Gulfport. Well, this was
I don't believe it.
January, February. Well, it was February by then.
Wow.
So yeah, we were going, yeah, Ray, this is great. The Riviera of the Gulf Coast, and it's snowing.
Yeah.
So then I got sent to, like I say, to Port Hueneme, California, and then I went to Vietnam.
So in California, what I guess were you doing in that interim of domestic service?
Well, I got assigned to some 30th something or other unit that was essentially you just sat there and marked time until you went somewhere. So I don't even know that I had any duties being a non-commissioned officer. So.
Do you,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. Do you remember like what was the hardest part about this initial transition to the Navy, or what was hard? How different was it from college and experiences you had before?
When we were in Gulfport, it was, like I say, a combined basic training and non-commissioned officer academy. And some of us did not like the way we were being treated, so we were starting to complain. And of course, you can't complain when you're in the military. So we got straightened out quickly that you just be quiet and do what you're told. So that's the one thing I learned, you know. Not being a civilian anymore, you can't just complain whatever you want. You can't, if you don't like something, you can get up and leave. Well, you cannot do that in the military.
Did you receive any specialized training during this time?
Not that I know. Since I did not go to regular basic training, I really can't compare. But I was told it was a basic training and non-commissioned officer academy. So we learned how to give orders, how to look things up in manuals. I mean, we learned a lot of things that you needed to know as a non-commissioned officer, which a non-commissioned officer is somebody that has responsibility, and they have to make the soldiers or sailors under them do the things that they're told to do.
So you said after that you went to Vietnam. Can you tell us a little bit about that, when you got those orders, how you felt, what that initial move was like?
I'm odd. When I talked to my Navy recruiter in Canton, as we were talking, he asked me, or I asked him, what are my chances of going to Vietnam? And he went, and I said, I'd kind of like to go. He said, 90%? So when I got my orders to Vietnam, I really wasn't nervous about it. In the after basic training, I had some leave, so I went back up to Bowling Green, and driving up there, I was doing about 100 miles an hour, and I passed a Stady going the other way. So I looked in my mirror and I saw his taillights go on, so I just pulled over and waited.
Yeah.
And he came up behind me, or beside me, and said, driver's license and registration, please. And I looked at him and I said, what took you so long? And he went, oh. So I said, here's my driver's license, here's my registration, here are my orders to Vietnam. And he went, ah. He said, you be careful, you drive the speed limit from now on, you come home, please. I said, okay, trooper. So I remember that. Going to Vietnam was really odd. If you ever watched the movie Apocalypse Now, how it seemed like everything was surreal. Well, it's the same thing. I got orders to go to Vietnam, orders to go to this, wherever it was, someplace in California, I don't remember. And I got there, and it was a big American Airlines jet. So I got on, there was a whole bunch of other people there going to Vietnam. We flew into Da Nang, got out, and you fly in this air-conditioned airplane, And when you get there, it's like 120 degrees. So it was a huge, as soon as you walked out the door, it was almost like putting your head in an oven.
Not snowing in Mississippi anymore.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, it's California, but which I kind of hated because I froze to death in California. So anyhow, I had these orders, and I said, I'm supposed to go to a place called Quang Tri. And I asked somebody, and they said, oh, well, that's north of here. You have to go to the airport and find a plane that's going there. Okay, so I went to the airport. And they said, we've got a plane going to Dong Ha, which Quang Tri did not have a airport. And they said, it's leaving like 10 o'clock tomorrow or something like that. And they said, what do I do for tonight? And they said, we don't know. So I had a friend that was a Marine military policeman. So I went looking for him. I went to the gate there at the airport, which were guarded by Marines, and I asked about my friend who's a military policeman. And they said, oh, well, he's got to be down somewhere. And anyhow, this Jeep pulled up. There was two guys in it, a driver and a guy in the front seat, and they said, jump in the back. Well, it had a canvas top on, so I couldn't, I could just see from their, foreheads down. So I jumped in, and the guy, the passenger asked me, he said, what unit's your friend in? So I told him. He said, oh, he's at the embassy. So he told the driver, take us to the embassy. So anyhow, we got out, and when I got out, I leaned down and looked, and the passenger was a captain. So I saluted him and went and found my buddy, who was on guard duty at the embassy. And he looked at me and said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I came to visit. So while we're standing there, this American in civilian clothes came up, and he had a Vietnamese with him, and he said, I'd like you to arrest this man. And Larry, my friend, said, what for? And he said, this. And he said, in the bag, he says, I have $26,000 of MPC, which was military payment certificates that this guy gave me and wanted me to buy cigarettes for him. So anyhow, Larry told him where to take him. So I'm just like, this is surreal. Being chauffeured around by a Marine captain and seeing $26,000 back in 1968. That was a lot of money.
So did you spend time at the embassy that day?
A little bit. I don't remember much about it, but he was off duty shortly, and he asked me where I was staying, and I said, I have no clue. He said, well, you can stay with me. So I went to, they lived in like a hotel or something. And he said, I've got duty tonight. He said, you can stick around or you can come with me if you want. And I said, I'll ride around with you. So we're riding around patrolling. And the Jeep is going very, very fast, and these people are jumping out of the way and stuff. And I said, don't you hit these people every now and then? He said, yeah. He said, we do, but don't worry about it. He said, it's the water buffalo you can't hit. He said, you got to pay for them.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyhow, spent the night there. The next morning I got up and I said, Larry, I've got to go to the airport and catch a flight. And he said, oh, okay. He said, you go down to the river, get on the ferry, and go across the river. So I did. And we're out in the middle, and I'm looking around, and I'm the only American on the ferry. So you don't have a weapon or anything. Luckily, they didn't slit my throat and throw me overboard. So anyhow, I got on the plane, found the airport, got on the plane. The plane landed in a place called Dong Ha. It was a C-130, which with the gate on the back that folds down. I got off, it folded up and took off, and I looked around and there was absolutely nothing there. There was a sandbag bunker not too far away. So I went over to it, and luckily there was a guy sleeping in there.
Wow.
So I woke him up and I said, "How do you get to Quang Tree?" He said, "You go down to the road and you hitchhike. You
Oh
go
my
south."
gosh.
So okay, so I went down and hitchhiked, and got a military vehicle picked me up and dropped me off, and I went in and reported into my unit. So
That is crazy.
yes,
Wow.
surreal.
So after that, you reported and kind of, what was that like? What were you assigned to within that unit?
Well, I was a steel worker, so we built the buildings. We built wooden buildings with tin roofs. We built the Marine Corps base for the 3rd Marine Division, which is, we were attached to the 3rd Marine Division. And we built 5,000 buildings in a month and a half.
Wow.
Yes, we worked 6.5 12s. We got a half a day off on Sunday. Then it got to the point where I'm going, I'm working too hard for this little bit of money they're giving me. So I found out there was an opening on the security force, a perimeter guard. So that's, I transferred to that and got assigned to a bunker on the security line around the base. So there was myself and another guy, and I don't remember his name. We were in the bunker. He woke me up one night. I was sleeping, at that time it was like 50% alert, so he was up and I was sleeping. And he shot his rifle in the bunker. "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, it's a big rat."
Oh my goodness.
And it was weird because if you were sleeping, they jump on you, they almost knock the wind out of you.
Oh,
Yeah, they were big.
that's terrifying.
Big rats, yes. So I spent the rest of the time doing that.
Walk us through like what was kind of your daily life as perimeter security.
You were up pretty much all night, just depending on the alert level. If the alert level was high enough, they would give you a 3rd person, but usually it was just 2, so you'd spend half the night awake. And in the daytime, you filled sandbags, and you built and repaired the bunkers. One night, this smart aleck senior NCO came into our bunker, and apparently they didn't like my bunker buddy. So he came in and talked to us and checked to make sure we were awake and stuff. And then when he left, I heard a ping, which is the sound a hand grenade makes when the spoon comes off. And I just knew that guy had thrown a tear gas grenade into our bunker.
Oh,
so I yelled, "Mask," and the other guy rolled out of his bunk and put his on, and I put mine on, and the bunker filled up with tear gas.
Holy cow.
I ran out there and I was going to shoot him, but he was gone, luckily. You don't realize it. With a mask on, you don't breathe the tear gas, but it burns everywhere on you that is sweaty. So your armpits, your crotch.
Yeah.
I mean, we had to go take showers and stuff, and of course our bunker was unusable for a short period of time, just because a guy thought he was playing a trick on us.
Did he get in trouble for that?
Did he? I doubt it.
Doubtful.
Yeah. I did not, but I probably would have if I'd have shot him. I was that angry. Well, that it scares you.
Yeah. I imagine it's not something that you can just throw around and use just to be funny either.
No, I don't know why he did that. But I assume my bunker partner
did something to deserve it.
Yeah. I think he might have been doing drugs or selling drugs or something. I'm not sure.
So what What other duties did you have? What kind of was that time like as a security officer? Is that what you did for the rest of your time in Vietnam?
The first tour there.
Your first tour.
Yeah, in the Navy you did 9 months sea duty, 6 months shore duty.
Okay.
So I was lucky. I got picked to go home on the advanced party, so I got leave and I was home for Christmas. The rest of them were still in Vietnam for Christmas. So then we came back, and in that 6 months we trained up and got new seamen and trained them and stuff. And having done ironwork, there's something called reinforcing rods that they put in concrete, and you tie them with wire. And even though I did not like that part of my job, I was pretty good at it, so I was training them how to do it. So they wanted me to go to Guam on the second tour. And I said, no, I'm going back to Vietnam. I did not like the peacetime Navy. They would say, all right, things are going to change. These are the new rules. We're going to follow these rules. And 2 weeks later, you're back to whatever, you know. So you'd get a new officer, a new NCO or something, and they'd want to exert their authority, and you'd have to jump through hoops, because being in the military, you can't just do whatever you want. Well, in Vietnam, it was so much more laid back. So then I went, and I immediately seek to get in the base perimeter security again. So that was 1969, so I was 22 years old then, and most of the other kids were quite a bit younger. And I was fairly mature for a 22-year-old, but you know, who can be mature at 22? But anyhow, so they, I was an E4, and there was an E stands for enlisted, an E6 over top of me, and then, no, there was an E5, and then an E6, and then we worked for a Marine Gunnery Sergeant, which was an E7. So the E5 decided he didn't want to do it anymore, so they gave me his spot. Although he was in like an E7 slot as an E5. So as an E4, I was doing things that an E7 should have been doing. Of course, you know, the Navy likes that because they don't have to pay me for an E7, they pay me for an E4. So I had 18 bunkers, 15 machine guns, 30 men. No, I had to have 15 bunkers, so it must have been 13 machine guns, 30 men, and then some nights if there was a special alert, they would give me 15 more men. So sometimes I had 45 men that I was responsible for. And I would have to drive around at night, make sure they were all awake, make sure their machine guns were in working order.
Not throw tear gas at them.
Not sleeping. I'd bring them around something called mid-rats, which were midnight rations, brown bag lunches. Because, you know, they were there from dark till dawn. So that was my job.
So where in Vietnam were you at that time for that second tour?
That second time I was there, we supported the 101st Airborne Division near Hue. It was their base camp, Camp Evans. We were a portion of their perimeter called Camp Haines. And part of my other duties was once we secured the bunker line, the front gate was manned, and you know, for the day, I would have to supervise the cleaning of the machine guns and their individual rifles and M79 grenade launchers. I would have to inspect them. I then opened the Enlisted Man's Club. I ran the Enlisted Man's Club for them. and then they got to go home and go to sleep. And then I had to take the battalion commander's jeep and go to the 101st Airborne Division's briefing, where they would brief the general, the commanding officer. I attended that briefing. A little funny thing. At night it got warm, so I wore a t-shirt. I had a shoulder holster with a .45 and my helmet, and then I would drive around. Well, when I went to the briefing, I put my soft hat on, which looked very much like a Marine Corps. Well, it's the same hat, except it didn't have the eagle, globe, and anchor in black on it. And then my rank, which was a petty officer third, which was an eagle with one chevron underneath. Well, and they're black, so they don't shine. Well, knocking it around and stuff. I actually didn't wear it except for that, and apparently some of the black got knocked off. So I'm walking up this boardwalk. The airport was at the top of this big hill. Then there was a big boardwalk down to the bottom, but halfway underneath the airport was the bunker. So I was walking up to the bunker, not shaven because I'd worked all night, had my hat on and my .45 and stuff, pulled up in the Jeep and was walking up there, and these two Army majors were walking down. They must have just got to Vietnam because they still had starched uniforms on. I mean, 120 some degrees, and they're still in their starched uniform. And they both like popped a salute to me, and I saluted them back, and I'm walking, and I'm going, what? They saw that silver eagle. They thought I was a Marine Corps full bird colonel, which was 2 ranks above them. So I got a chuckle out of that. The only E4 that's had 2 Army majors salute me.
That's great. So, how long were you there on this second tour? Did you see any combat security patrolling, or what kind of was consolidation?
We had, I think it was there 6 or 7 months, something like that. We were part of President Nixon's big troop pullout, except he pulled out all of the combat service and service support people. He left all the poor grunts out in the field, but, which is, I got to give those guys credit. There's something called tooth to tail, and the tooth is the infantry people. There are very few. Maybe 10-15% of the people in the military are the ones that actually go out and do the fighting. The other 80-90% are service people.
So after that, you got orders to come home. What was that experience like?
It was really kind of neat. When I was there, you could buy cars through the PX. So I bought a Triumph TR6 that I had to go pick up in New York. So anyhow, I got back to California. They gave me they talked to me. They did this recruiting thing, right? When I initially enlisted, it was 2 years active duty, and I signed a 30-day, or not 30-day, 6-month extension. So it would have been 30 months. So, but at that time I had about 8 months left, something like that. So they said to me, well, if you extend for a year, add to your 6-month extension so you have a year total, we'll promote you to E5, or, and I said, or what? And they said, or you can get out. And I said, goodbye. So I got out we decommissioned our battalion. I was part of the decommissioning ceremony, and we got out. So I had some cousins in Chicago, so I flew to Chicago in my navy blues, dress blues. Actually, you know, a lot of people at that time were being spit on, but nobody said anything to me. And then I hitchhiked home from Chicago, which is weird because I mean I got picked up by all kinds of people.
What was that like? Who was the craziest person you met?
Well, I guess the craziest was I got picked up by a woman in a station wagon with her kids and her groceries.
Wow.
And she took me, I forget how far, you know, because I thought, wow, she was really brave.
Yeah.
But so that's crazy.
Yeah.
And then I got picked up by one guy that wanted me to stop at the roadside rest with him, and I said, okay. So he stopped, and I got out, and I said goodbye. So that, well, yeah. Anyhow, came home. My hardest, it's weird, I hitchhiked from Chicago to about Akron. No problem at all. Getting home from Akron to Canton was tough.
Really?
It seemed like it must have been maybe that part of the day or whatever it is. I could hardly get a ride anywhere.
So what, I guess those first initial weeks home, what was that like? And I know you mentioned you enlisted in the Army later.
Well, just to, for instance, I mean, just to go back a second. When I was in Vietnam getting ready to come home the second time, I don't know why, but I just craved a McDonald's double cheeseburgers. So anyhow, well, I got out of the military. I went back to college, and of course, on the GI Bill, and I wasted the government's money. I met my lovely wife. And when I was in Vietnam, I started doing martial arts. Well, actually, I started doing it when I was at Bowling Green, too. But when I came home, then I continued doing it. And I had a karate school in Worcester, Ohio. And my wife came and was one of my students. So we dated about a year. And I asked her to marry me, and she said no, which shocked me. So a couple weeks later, I said, come on, we're going shopping. And she said, what for? I said, wedding rings. So she actually went along. We got the wedding rings, and we set a date and all that stuff, and she never did say yes. Now, the funny thing is, on her 25th wedding anniversary, I said, why don't we get married again, renew our vows and stuff? And she said, no. So she turned me down twice. I'm not going to ask her to marry me again. So anyhow, we got married. I taught martial arts for a lot of years. We have two grown sons. One is just turned 40. Can't be that old, can I? And one is 38. We have 5 grandchildren. And back when they were still in grade school, I saw the world starting to fall apart, so to speak. And through my martial arts training, I have what I call a killer instinct. So I, at that time, I had also become a reserve deputy sheriff in Holmes County, where I live. And so I went down to the recruiter and found out that I could join. Well, no, actually, the guy that delivered my propane was in the Army Reserve. He was a military policeman. He said, oh, you ought to join. They have this Try One where you can join for 1 year. So I went down and I did that. So, by the way, he ended up my sergeant major. So I joined the military police corps in the Army Reserve. And I stayed there in Worcester. They had a detachment of a company in Columbus. That's when I got called up to go to Germany for Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I spent about 6 months on active duty at that time. It's weird. I got activated on December 7th, so a special date in history. Came back. They turned my unit into a military, into a enemy prisoner of war unit, and I did not want to be a prison guard. The one thing that I did like about the MPs that I was doing, we were what they call rear area battlefield circulation MPs. We did a lot of infantry tactics and stuff. Well, I found out there was a Ohio National Guard infantry unit in Lima, Ohio. So I transferred to that. But before I was able to become MOSQ, which is Military Occupational Specialty, they turned that unit into a M1 tank unit. So I became an M1 tanker, and that's when I think I was a E5 sergeant. So I stayed with the tanks, and I became an E6 and an E7 when I finally retired in 2002 as an E7. The thing is, I was down at this Gunny Ermy that just passed away, was supposed to be at a signing in a gun store in Columbus called Vance's. So I decided I'm going down there. So I went down there, and I'm standing in line, and this guy came walking from the front of the line up to me, and he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Woody Wilson." He said, "Woody," he said, "I'm Sergeant Pelfrey. I'm your old first sergeant." And then I recognized him. So, and that's been, I don't know how many years ago, 4 or 5, maybe more. And we get together twice a year now, a bunch of us old infantry guys, our old command sergeant major, the state sergeant major, my first sergeant, a bunch of us. But we have different people. We have Marines, we have Navy SEALs, and we camp out, and then we camp out on a Thursday night, shoot Friday, and sometimes on Saturdays.
Awesome.